Rocky 2 is the direct sequel to the Best Picture winning classic. And when I mean direct, I mean literally direct, to the point where this movie has a previously on Rocky segment in the very beginning that is immediately followed up by the actual plot of the movie. A trait that would go on to define the Rocky movies that previously on. And honestly, one of the things that I love about this franchise, I mean, where are you going to find a previously on segment for a movie franchise? So the first Rocky is considered by a lot of people, including myself, to be one of the most iconic and one of the best films ever made, which makes Rocky 2 a little sidelined by comparison because a lot of people just sort of group this movie along with the first Rocky because they both seem very similar in terms of cinematography, in terms of tone. And while I can definitely see a lot of that, and I certainly don't think that this movie is as good as the first movie, I still think this movie is pretty damn good in its own right. Especially considering the fact that along with writing and starring in this movie, just like the first movie, Stallone also directs this movie. This is his first directing debut, and he kills it in this movie. The fact that so many people just compare in their minds the looks and the feels of this movie to the first movie, which was directed by an entirely different person, just goes to show you how much Stallone knows the Rocky franchise and how much he loves the Rocky franchise. And along with how fantastic he is in just directing this movie, let's talk about his writing, because his writing in this movie is so good. It could have been so easy to just make this a carbon copy cutout of the original film, like a couple of the others do later on, but we'll get into that when we get into that. But in this movie, for the most part, for I would say a good 2/3 of the movie, it is not the same movie as the first one in the slightest. In this movie, yeah, Rocky lost the big fight in the last movie, but he's got a lot of winnings out of it. He's got a lot of money out of it. So what does he do? He goes on a spending spree throughout the majority of the movie. He spends a lot on cars, on clothes, on houses. He marries Adrian. But then after that, after he realizes the fact that he spent all of his money, he goes into this slump of depression where he can't get a job, he can't hold down a steady gig. Rocky 2 does a fantastic job at making clear that even though in some capacity he's won, he is still nowhere near the top dog, and he is definitely still the underdog that we know and love him from in the first movie. To the point where he feels like he has to accept this rematch from Apollo Creed. It's not just like this hunger burning inside him, it's like an actual financial need, and we really do understand that. And speaking of Apollo, just like in the first movie, he is definitely the best Rocky antagonist we've had to date. Both Stallone's writing and Carl Weathers' acting made it perfectly clear in the first movie that even though Apollo Creed is technically the villain, you don't really hate him because he's just so likable. In this movie, yeah, he definitely has more of an antagonistic role as he's trying to get Rocky out of retirement for a rematch, which is one of my issues because in the previously on segment that they play in the beginning of this movie, Apollo makes it perfectly clear that he doesn't want a rematch. And then literally the very next scene, he's calling out Rocky, "Hey, I want a rematch!" But as the movie goes on, you do understand why he wants a rematch so badly, because so many people think that he fixed the fight. So many people are sending him hate mail and death threats. Kids are even bullying his own kids at school at one point. Apollo's motivation is perfectly clear, very understandable, and still doesn't make him a necessary bad guy, more of an antagonist. He's a person, and you do see more of his personal life in this movie, to the point where you understand that he has something to lose if he doesn't win. And this movie has what I like to call the Spider-Man 2 syndrome, where if you really want to connect with your main character, the real key to doing that is beat them to a bloody pulp, emotionally, psychologically, howeverly you need to do. To the point where financial difficulties aren't just enough for Rocky to be beaten down, but it has to be that his wife is put in a coma immediately after their child is born. And the acting from everyone throughout the movie is fantastic, but in this segment in particular, Everyone brings their A game. Stallone is heartbreaking talking to Adrian while she's in a coma. Burt Young is heartbreaking even though he doesn't say or do much, you can still read a lot from his expressions. And when Burgess Meredith is trying to convince Rocky that he still has to take the fight with Apollo Creed even though his wife is in the hospital, but no matter what he chooses to do, Mickey will always stand by Rocky. It's just beautiful from every single person on screen. And to be fair, this is where some of my problems do come into play with this movie. Not just these scenes, but for the most part, a lot of what happens, especially in the second third of this movie. This movie has the same runtime as the first film, but particularly in this movie, especially the middle portion, there are parts that do drag. Like, I understand drawing out Rocky's hopelessness, but there are portions where it could have been trimmed down, I guess. And then we get to the last third where Adrian finally wakes up and Rocky is in full fight and motivation mode, in full montage mode. And this is where some of the overlap of the first Rocky movie I can see more. Because even though the montage in the last third of this movie is different enough from the first film, there are portions of this where it does feel like they took the cliff notes of the first film and just crushed it down so that they meet the 2-hour requirement. But still, that's not really a big complaint because the training montage is still awesome and the Rocky run in this movie is arguably a bit better than the first film. And while that might seem blasphemous to some, in this movie, when all of the kids in Philly just gather around Rocky and start running with him all the way up to the art museum, it truly does feel like Philly was a character in the first film, but in this movie, especially because of this scene, it feels like all of Philadelphia is for Rocky. They're all rooting for Rocky. Just like real Philadelphia, movie Philadelphia has Rocky up on a pedestal. And as cheesy as that might be to some people, I just love it, especially considering the fact that me, my family, and a lot of my friends know kids back then who were in that Rocky run in Rocky 2. And then we have the big fight, and this couldn't be any more different than in the first film. Unlike in the first film, where the fight was more or less evenly matched between Apollo and Rocky, Apollo is just wailing on Rocky throughout most of this match. The amount of times Rocky goes down in these 15 rounds is insane. Although going back to that whole, this movie doesn't retread the first film, yeah, when Rocky says, "I can't believe it, he broke my nose again," that does always make me groan in embarrassment, like, but that small groan of embarrassment is completely wiped out by not just how awesome the fight is, but how incredible the ending is. Rocky's been beaten to a bloody pulp, Apollo's exhausted from beating Rocky to a bloody pulp, and it gets to the point where both of them go down and it's just a race to the top. Who will stand up first? And my God, everything in this scene is just perfect. The editing, the music, the acting from everyone. In my opinion, that race to the top is one of the most intense scenes in any movie. And when the referee gets to the 9 count and Apollo just falls down and Rocky gets up, it's one of the most cheer-worthy moments ever put to screen. Yo, Adrian, I did it. It's one of the most satisfying endings ever put to film, up there with the first Rocky movie, and it's just amazing. Guys, I have my nitpicks with Rocky 2, but my God, almost everything I love about Rocky 1 is in Rocky 2 without it being a full-on rehash, and how can I not love that? The fact that I can't imagine a better follow-up to a masterpiece like the original Rocky really does speak volumes to the quality of Rocky 2, so, of course, I'm going to give Rocky 2 an A+. 2 A+ in a row. Even I forgot this movie was that good, but it is. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments down below, what is your favorite direct sequel? For me, Rocky 2 is definitely up there, but there's also answers like Empire Strikes Back and The Dark Knight, so God, this really is a hard one to answer. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are the best, and don't forget to click subscribe and click the bell icon down below to stay up to date on all things movie, all things TV, all things nerd.